If you've ever wanted more happiness during this exceptionally trying time, then do we have the Neurodharma show for you. Today I'll be talking with Dr. Rick Hanson, neuropsychologist, brain expert, and the best-selling author of Hardwiring Happiness, Just One Thing, The Buddha's Brain, Resilient, and his latest, incredibly peaceful and enlightening book, Neurodharma. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about new science, ancient wisdom, and practices of the highest happiness for this interesting time. That, plus we'll talk about Jill Franzel and I Stop for Suffering, Streams and Eddies, Four Noble Truths, the Buddha and his son, the Dalai Lama's bodyguard, concentration power, and what in the world long hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and a bamboo flute has to do with anything. So welcome back to the show, Rick. Are you ready to shine?
Michael, it's great to be here. And as always, you're just great. It's great.
Thank you. It goes both ways, my brother. With that said, we talked about being a little survival-oriented here before we started the show. As a neuroscientist, with everything going on in the world today, what is going on with our minds?
It's a scary time. And it's a time also where I think people are also feeling a certain anger, disgust, very primal, powerful emotions, fear, anger, and disgust. Disgust being a moral disgust about some of the outrages we're gradually reckoning with. And also, I think, fears of contamination. We have been invaded worldwide. I speak as someone living in America and California, but I want to be clear, of course, this plague is spreading around the world. And it's freaky to be attacked, number one, and number two, attacked by an invisible enemy. While number three, there's kind of a widespread concern that leadership at the highest level is failing us. So all those together provide a kind of perfect storm. Therefore, for me as a practical guy in the trenches, as a therapist and a meditation teacher, I'm more focused than ever on how people can find their footing and build up calm strength and other inner resources to meet the challenge of this turbulent time.
Thank you. So if we go to, when I think of Dr. Rick Hanson, I'm always thinking of tigers and all sorts of interesting things, of us looking for the tiger out there. Now we've actually found some tigers. What's that lighting up in our brain, and what's that doing to our IQ points?
Well, I think people in general are alarmed and concerned and trying to make sense out of all this. There are, in the lifetime of people, certainly in the Western world, we are not used to a plague of any seriousness. Now, in our history, going back to the so-called Spanish flu, which wasn't really Spanish, in 1918 or so, my great-grandmother died of it, actually.
Wow.
And so, we have some sense of that, but it's not in living memory, right? And so I think there's a way in which that people are really alarmed and uncertain and uneasy. And therefore, we're on the one hand vulnerable to reaching for quick fixes outside of ourselves, or trying to make it go away. There's a certain amount of denial, which, as the teenagers say, is not just a river in Egypt. While also, I think people are looking for the kinds of things that you offer, that I offer, comfort, wisdom, stability, and practical tools that they can actually use every day. And so, I'm busier than ever. I had this book that came out, Neurodharma, came out in May, and it could be understood as sort of esoteric, but actually what it offers is how we can learn from the great teachers and sages throughout history, informed now by brain science, to bring the kind of inner strength and inner peace and fundamental qualities of compassion and contentment down into the challenges of our everyday life. So I've gotten busier than ever, actually.
As have we. And in fact, when we started, we went on air every single night on YouTube to try to help people until we had to put the oxygen mask on ourselves and back things down. Let's go into what is Neurodharma, and then we're going to talk about some specific techniques today so people can quickly start to get, like we did at the beginning, at least a little centered during this time.
Yeah. Well, the word itself is a kind of exotic word. I made it up. Neuro seems pretty clear. That's how we can know ourselves scientifically, biologically, neurologically, from the outside in. That's the third person objective perspective of science. The word Dharma points to the ways that we can know ourselves from the inside out through modern psychology, and also, in particular, through the perennial wisdom of the ages. I draw upon the Buddha's original roadmap for exploring the mind and becoming to a fundamental liberation and inner peace amidst the craziness of any time period. And the meeting of those two, the outside-in ways of knowing ourselves and the inside-out ways of knowing ourselves, is what I mean by Neurodharma, which gives us a profound way to move back and forth from the level of the mind and the level of the brain, and actually use our mind to change our brain for the better, and our mind, therefore, for the better as well.
Beautiful. And so I'm going to leap ahead about halfway through your book, and then we're going to dial back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Right now, we are habituating our minds, as I see it, for REM. It's the end of the world as we know it. The more that we focus on the dopamine response, I'm as guilty as anybody. Please don't think that I'm not. Of checking the news, what I used to call negative, worthless stimulation. The more I'm affecting my brain, aren't I?
Oh yeah, we are profoundly vulnerable to negative learning. That's useful, in the Stone Age and back in Jurassic Park, and sometimes it's useful for people, but we can get taken way too far with a brain that's designed to be like Velcro for bad experiences, but Teflon for good ones. And so one of the things we have to be careful about is staying clear of the rewards, including, like you said, the dopamine rush of the news endlessly. One thing that's interesting also about anger, and this book surveys the most recent research of the last several years and its relevance here. One of the things that's interesting about anger, because there's a lot of anger flying around these days, is that it brings dopamine and norepinephrine surges with it. Unlike the other so-called negative emotions, people don't like feeling sad, they don't like feeling afraid, they don't like feeling inadequate or ashamed. But wow, that first rush of anger can feel so good, and it can sweep us away. So of all the so-called negative emotions, which have their place, they all have their place, anger is the one we have to be most careful about. When I think back on my mistakes in relationships, they usually began with anger.
What can we do then as the anger comes up? You catch something on the news, and it might be what you would call as righteous anger, but it's anger nonetheless. What do we do so that we're not hardwiring our mind for anger?
Yeah, it's a key question. Anger, first of all, alerts us to real threats. And if a person belongs to any group, women, people of color, any people in poverty, any group that's had their very deserved anger shamed, suppressed, minimized, discounted, pushed away, punished, blah, blah. There's no way in shape or form that I'm trying to say you should not be angry.
Right.
As a psychologist, though, and a neuropsychologist, it's very clear about the long-term toxic impact of chronic anger on individuals and in relationships and in societies. So to deal with anger, I think we start with appreciating its value. What is it trying to tell me? How is it energizing me? As a therapist, I'd rather have clients who are angry than depressed because there's some energy there that we can work with. Okay, anger might be where we start, but it should not be where we stop. And then what is useful is to ask ourselves, what's beneath the anger? Very often there's fear, there's a sense of threat, or frustration, a sense of obstruction in the attainment of important goals, or often a sense of hurt, being let down or betrayed by others, or perhaps a combination of these. And getting at that deeper layer of fear, frustration, or hurt is a key aspect of working through the anger. Then also we need to move into a coping response. One of the things that I see people doing a lot these days is marinating in helpless outrage or helpless disgust or contempt for others. And that's not good for us. That place of sputtering, kind of fuming, yelling at the people on the television set. I'm guilty of that myself. Composing emails at 2 or 3 in the morning in your mind, to other people where you're going to read them the riot act. I'm guilty of that as well. I know what that's like. That's not good for us. So it's important to move into some kind of coping response so that either we let go. We see the situation and we realize there are many, many causes and conditions creating it. My anger about this is not helping me. I'm going to let go of it. I'm going to release it. Maybe I'm going to move into compassion.
Yeah.
And or go the other direction. Really talk with the person. Really take action. Do what you need to do. But this middle place where we're kind of fuming and sputtering, resenting, drinking poison, hoping that others will die, that is not good for us or other people.
Thank you. So you have a tool early on, and I'm going to mention this tool, but maybe there's someplace else we get to go. When this comes up, you talked about letting go. There's something you call letting be, letting go, and letting in. And that makes me think of like Ram Dass and let's snuggle up with the pain or the fear, the anger. There we go.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, that framework is just a great framework, Michael, and I appreciate you flagging it. If you imagine that your mind, and therefore your brain, is like a garden, we can basically engage it productively and helpfully in 3 kinds of ways. First, we can witness it. In other words, we can be with what's there without trying to change it. We feel the feelings, we experience the experience. Hopefully, we do this skillfully with spaciousness and mindfulness and disidentification from what we're feeling. It's there. We're not trying to suppress it, but we're not letting ourselves be hijacked by it. Mm-hmm. And maybe also we investigate the underlying softer, more vulnerable, often younger layers, and maybe even bring insight into the nature of all experiences. This was one of the radical insights of the Buddha, that all experiences have the same fundamental nature. They are impermanent, compounded, made of parts. They arise dependently upon their causes, and therefore, in a technical kind of sense, they are empty of essence. They exist, but like clouds rather than bricks. In the process of just being with our experience, just witnessing the garden might change, but we're not trying to deliberately nudge it. This is the foundation practice. It's where we start. It's often where we end, and it's often our only resort because it's all we can do. Ride out the storm, hopefully not mixing my metaphors here, putting, gasoline on the fire. But it's not the entirety of practice. And many people in the Western world, I think, have overvalued it and a stance of kind of passive witnessing of the stream of consciousness. We must also engage wise efforts, as the Buddha taught, to pull weeds. In other words, let go, release, reduce, abandon, step away from the chalupa, walk away from that angry thought, let that feeling flow, let the tension out of the body, let go, pull the weeds. And also we must plant flowers. We must do things like you teach, the cultivation of insight, wisdom, calm, compassion for others, broader understandings. We have to grow flowers in the garden of the mind. So for me, these 3 really summarize the essence of practice: let be, let go, let in. They have a natural rhythm. When we're upset, we start by letting be, then we let go, then we let in. And often we need to appreciate that first we actually need to resource ourselves. We need to let in. We need to cultivate positive qualities inside ourselves, including the capacity to tolerate our feelings, to be able to be with them in the first place.
Thank you. I'm gonna take a very fun little tangent here. My wife and I have a habit that we've done. We started this year. It was several years in the making, but we go outside to sit and meditate on our deck and have chipmunks, regular squirrels, and golden mantle squirrels, of which you're very familiar with, sit in our laps during meditation, and we bribe them. We have sunflower seeds, but they sit in our laps nonetheless.
That's pretty great.
Thank you. You must keep your mind, this gets to concentration power, you must keep your mind pure and focused, or they will freak out and run. So you really have to watch where each thought will be. And one of the thoughts that comes up is, wow, these guys are just here in the moment. They don't know what's on the news. They don't know what's going on in DC or Wisconsin or coming from China or whatever. And they have taught us, these squirrels have taught us so much through this meditation. And I'm wondering, what have your squirrels taught you?
Well, I think in part you might be alluding to the beginning of one of the chapters, I think the second chapter of the book, where one thing that squirrels have taught me is the continuity of consciousness from humans to non-human animals. Monkeys, squirrels, cats, lizards, goldfish. I'm speaking of creatures in my backyard. And even as I try to imagine what's happening in the mind of a spider as I move it out of the house into the yard. Is it afraid? Is it recognizing what's happening to it? Is it having experiences of some rudimentary sort? I think we would all agree that squirrels are having experiences. Cats and dogs are having experiences, probably lizards as well. They're seeing, they're hearing, they move through states of consciousness, they wake, they sleep. Literally, all animals with a nervous system have the equivalent of some form of dream sleep. What in the world is a fruit fly dreaming when it dreams, or a shark? Anyway, so that sense of continuity is a deep teaching. And it brings in, for me at least, it brings us into a sense of stunned awe, just grateful, gobsmacked, awe at the gift of consciousness, the gift of experiences. And it helps us appreciate the ways in which our moment right now of hearing, seeing, loving, hating, enjoying is rested in underlying physical processes. There may well be, perhaps, supernatural or transcendental factors that reach beyond the ordinary, quote-unquote, Big Bang universe that we inhabit. But apart from those, everything boils down to physical processes, which for me is not reductionistic or overly deterministic. It actually helps me appreciate the ways in which mind is grounded in life. And so that means, therefore, that when we can, we should take the power that we do have to shift gradually the underlying physical factors in our brain, in our nervous system, to guide ourselves to a better place. So they've definitely taught me that, and I'll leave it there. Thank you, squirrels.
Woohoo! Since we're talking about physical processes and mind, you make this, it's also in chapter 2, actually. Mind changing, brain changing, mind.
Yeah.
What's going on there, and how can that help us, that understanding help us, where mind is continuously rewiring us on a moment-to-moment basis?
So let me turn it around if I could, and we'll have a little scientific inquiry here with you. So what would you say is a trait, a fairly stable quality in yourself that is more developed today than it was ballpark a year ago?
Ooh, than just a year ago. My optimism.
Okay. And I'm imagining that by optimism, you mean both the ways that you appraise things and including how you kind of see the future, probably with associated feelings, perhaps reassurance, calm, some positive emotion in there, right? So let's suppose that that's the case and there's some stability there. Well, right off the top, clearly, the parts of your brain, mainly right behind the forehead, prefrontal regions that are involved with conceptualization and how we forecast, how we anticipate the future, have actually had shifts in their circuitry. I suspect also, are you right-handed?
Technically. I came from lefty parents, but yeah.
Yeah. Probably the more leftward sides of your prefrontal regions that are for right-handed people are a little more active and stimulated because they tend to be more involved with opportunity focus and with an approach orientation, which is associated as well with optimism. So we're seeing already some of the ways in which the underlying circuitry in your brain is the basis for a stable, relatively stable trait-based shift in your mind over this period of time. Probably also there's a little less activation, at least in your amygdala, the alarm bell of the brain, because optimism buffers us against overly negative reactivity that is more common for people who are living in the mind of defensive pessimism, where they're doing this anticipatory, preemptive strikes about the possibility of anything good just to make sure they don't get disappointed. And who knows, probably also a slight uptick, at least, in activity of serotonin and natural opioids that are associated with positive emotions. So that's an illustration of the ways in which any lasting change of mind must involve a lasting change of brain. And one of the interesting things then is to work backwards. And that's what my book is very much about. How can we use this new understanding of the intersection of mind and brain that I summarize with the term Neurodharma? How can we use this new understanding informed by the greatest wisdom of the ages, right, to specifically target key circuits, such as the ways I've deconstructed what's happening in your brain, right, to target key circuits to strengthen them so that we benefit from that strengthening every day.
Thank you. So on that note, why don't we talk about how we can HEAL ourselves?
That's great. So you know my material. Well, this is the fundamental process of lasting change. And it's quite haunting that people seek positive experiences legitimately. They seek happiness. They seek feelings of love, feelings of worth, feelings of calm and inner peace. And yet, what do most people do when they're having those experiences? Right? They quickly move on to the next thing.
Yes.
Or even deny them or push them away. And it's really quite poignant. It's haunting, even tragic, that we chase rewards that we actually do not let into ourselves when we have them in our hands. Or literally, it's as if we're seeking food. We feel hungry inside, but as it lands in our mouth, we spit it out. We maybe taste it for a second or two, but we don't take it into ourselves. And so what I've tried to do is focus on the fundamental neuropsychological process of social emotional learning, broadly defined, the development of optimism or compassion or grit or gratitude as stable traits. And we can help ourselves maximize the impact of the experiences we're having so they actually sink in and leave lasting physical traces in the brain by, and I use the HEAL acronym as the fundamental framework for doing this, first have some kind of beneficial experience. Typically, because you're already having it, I'm enjoying being with you. I'm looking at your purple shirt. I kind of really like it. I have warm feelings for you. This is, I think, maybe our third conversation. I forget, but I know it's not our first. And it could be even the fourth. Who knows? It's been a while. And so that's happening already. Or deliberately, I could, look out the window to find the flowers. I see a butterfly going right by in this moment. Either way, whether you notice it or you create it, have a beneficial experience. And then move into the internalization. There's this summary saying neurons that fire together, wire together. You want to help the wiring process from the inside out. So you can enrich an experience, E for enrich in the word heal, by keeping it going for a breath or longer, feeling it in your body, focusing on what's personally relevant about it, and some other methods. And you can have a sense of absorbing the experience into yourself by intending to receive it, actually, and sensing it sinking in and focusing on what is rewarding about it, which in effect increases the sensitivity of the brain to the experience it's having at the time. It's a little bit like if the brain is like a sponge. Enriching means concentrating that lovely green liquid, like the backdrop behind you. A very nice complement to the purple. You got the color thing really working there. And then so you want to get that experience really enriched. But then also you want to make the sponge, as it were, of the brain as porous and permeable and receptive as possible through absorbing. That's the essence of the fundamental process.
Yeah.
Optionally, if you want, you can link positive and negative material together.
Yes.
And you can, for example, let's say, while really resting in an experience of being cared about by others, in the foreground of your awareness, maybe off to the side, is that sense of being mistreated by somebody, or childhood experiences, such as I had a fair number of feeling left out and unwanted, squirrely and inadequate. I'm using the squirrel word in a negative sense, and less than others. And therefore, since neurons that fire together wire together, if the positive is bigger than the negative, when you're linking them together, the positive will gradually calm, contextualize, soothe, and even eventually replace the negative material. In effect, you're using flowers in the linking step to crowd out and eventually even uproot the weeds that linger in your mind.
Thank you. I want to go on to some really fun stuff in a minute. Before I do that, since you're talking about getting squirrely, when it comes to the news, I have helped people go from squirrely to chipmunking our minds into positivity. How do you like that? By linking, you've looked at something negative, and I put that in quotes. And then can we link it to a positive habit? Can we go look for some positive news? Can we go to gratitude from that negativity that's coming in so that we do not stay in that dwelling place of that negative thought?
I think that's great. I mean, so very often there's a rhythm for people, and this is a rhythm of mental activity that might take 30 seconds. It might take 30 hours or 30 days or even months, where we start with some kind of, I'll call it suffering, stress, some kind of difficult experience. We're watching the news, we're triggered by it, we're upset about it. Maybe we watch the news and we're alarmed by it, and then we live with someone who is trying to talk in an inappropriate way, is dismissing our understandable reaction to what we've seen on television. Okay, that's where we start. Then there's a movement, as I've walked through, where we feel what we're feeling. We try to understand it. We recognize it. We be with it. If it's familiar, if it's the usual suspects in your own mind, I know what that's like, then, we move on to fairly rapidly, or maybe we stay with it for a while and really explore it, and including try to get to know the younger material in us that has turbocharged our reactions to what's happening in the moment. We be with it. Then we move into letting go and letting in. That's fairly straightforward. As a bonus, sometimes it's very helpful when we're letting in the positive that ideally is matched to the negative, so that any positive will help to neutralize and balance negative, but it's better the more matched they are. So for example, if we're anxious about something, gratitude is nice, but it's not well matched to a threat to our primary need for safety. Gratitude is well matched for a challenge to our primary need for satisfaction, broadly defined. So as we internalize, or as we just kind of marinate in, or receive into ourselves this positive material that's matched to the negative, if we want, we can bring it into contact with the negative deliberately in our own minds for a complete healing. And one of the weird, I'll say perverse in a sense, benefits of being upset is that it surfaces underlying crud. We can't heal things that are unconscious. We need to bring them into awareness. So sometimes what will happen is you're watching the news. I'll make up a little story here. Actually, it's kind of true. I'll out him a little. So our 32-year-old son was living with us for quite a while during the time of COVID. He'd lived with us for several years. He travels a lot. He kind of used our home as base camp. Then after a few months of quarantine in California, he moved out so he could be with his girlfriend again, which is all fine. His mom and I would watch the news, and we would see something that we were morally appalled about. We were just appalled at the management of this plague in America, including early on, like February and March of this year. Our son, who didn't want to think about this stuff, he just wanted to keep it out of his mind, was really quite dismissive and righteous in his attitude toward us. which, we manage in various ways and we love each other and all that's fine. But I could argue that righteousness on his part and dismissiveness went back into my childhood, which was a long time ago. In my own background with my parents, who were very anxious and they grew up in the Depression. And if I was upset about something, they wanted to shut it down as fast as they possibly could. So anyway, bring my story to a close. It's interesting. So our son actually served me by reactivating that old negative material, 50 years old, 60 years old, even going back to my childhood. But then once it is surfaced, I can cope with it better. I can be aware of it, and I can heal, literally, and also in terms of my acronym there, I can heal the deeper, younger, more powerful, frankly, more primary and primal layers of my own neurotic machinery. It's kind of like we'd say to somebody, thank you for upsetting me. I know black people who might say, well, it's a growth opportunity, but it actually is a growth opportunity when we get triggered by things.
Whether it's an individual or what I call now the human beingness, the allness of which we are each an individual participatory cell of the whole, everything that's under the carpet, whether it's from our generation or 400 years ago or even before that, is getting pulled up and put on our faces to be healed.
Yeah.
This is a healing opportunity.
I really agree with you, Michael. And, these two words have been echoing in my mind a lot lately, reckoning and repentance.
Yes.
This is a time of reckoning, and for many, I'm not trying to universalize this, but certainly for myself. And I believe for many, many systemic forces in the world, a time for repentance, for really facing the knees that have been on the necks, literally and figuratively, of many, many vulnerable people, many, many other people, and to come to terms with it. So yeah, and I'm really kind of hopeful. I think it's going to be a very bumpy ride, ballpark, public health-wise and economically for the next year or so, certainly politically in America for the next several months. But on the other side of that, in part because of younger people coming to the fore, every day, people come of age and turn 18 and can vote who just are more tolerant. They're more aware of the wider world. They're more tuned into the ways in which our fates are bound together. And I'm really quite hopeful for where things are going. We have obviously a long overdue reckoning with global climate change. We have a lot of carbon in the sky that we've got to come to terms with, that we're going to be living with and dealing with for multiple generations to come. Certainly that's really, really true. But in general, I'm pretty hopeful, actually, long term.
Woohoo! And I'm going to go right along with that, which is to say that whether it's protests, whether it's reaching out to others, whether it's community building, whether it's learning techniques like we're learning here, like you're teaching people, that we are actually wiring our minds. In the past, we wired our minds since childhood to a learned helplessness. Now I think we're maybe coming to a place, if we take action and believe in our actions, of learned hopefulness, that what we do actually matters. And I think the younger gen is really starting to latch on to that wait a second, I can do something that matters now.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to think about what you do or what I do as some sort of sprinkles on the frosting of the cake of life, some sort of optional yuppie luxury for privileged, in my case, I think yours too, white people. And it's actually the case, and this goes back to the Buddhist tradition and also goes back to issues around the world, that the worse things are, the more the world is kicking you in the teeth or definitely not helping you, the more important it is to look for ways to grow strengths inside yourself that are hardwired actually in your nervous system so that you carry with you, right? And so what we're talking about is particularly applicable for the people who are the most mistreated and the most disempowered of all. Absolutely true. And just to kind of underscore that, it's interesting. So my son and I, Forrest, who I've just kind of dinged slightly, but he's a wonderful person. He and I have a podcast ourselves called Being Well. And lately, Forrest has just done a beautiful job of reaching out to teachers and authorities of color and talking about the reckoning that's necessary at this time, and focusing on the truth of things. So this podcast is called Being Well. It's at the individual level, and yet part of individuals being well is intrinsically tied to the fates of others and to larger systemic forces that we clearly, need to reckon with and repent and, do something about.
If we go back from there, from Being Well, we'll go back about 20 years ago. You met the Dalai Lama, or at least the Dalai Lama is speaking where you are.
I had my 15 seconds of eye-to-eye close contact with him, in which he blessed a scarf, and I still have it. Yeah,
that's one of my dreams. So,
Yeah.
So you see the Dalai Lama's bodyguard.
Oh yeah,
and you talk about how he is in this most beautiful place. Of course, he could just go if he needed to in the moment.
Yeah, definitely.
What can you tell us? What can we learn from him?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Michael, because it's such a timely example at this time where I think people oscillate, understandably, between a sense of just helplessness and futility and kind of defeat and indifference. Just turn off the news. There's nothing you could do about it. Meanwhile, bread and circuses, right? Or on the other hand, just get crazy angry and aggressive and violent and, way out of proportion to what's happening. And so at this time in particular, I think it's useful to find this centered place. I call this strong heart.
Yeah.
Where we're at the intersection of love and power, of compassion and assertiveness. That's the sweet spot. It's fairly straightforward to be loving and kind. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's straightforward. It's fairly straightforward to be firm, set boundaries, be fiery with others, be assertive. But to bring the two together. And so the quick story is, and people can read about it in the book if they want, is that the Dalai Lama came into the room with about 100, maybe 150 people, including myself, in the audience, small room at Spirit Rock Meditation Center. He came in with his translator and another fellow. I hardly noticed this other guy. And then I gradually began to watch him. He filled out his suit like a dancer who had been a linebacker for a college football team. And he stood in the front of the room, actually, kind of off to the side slightly, and very smiling, very benevolent, radiating bodhicitta and loving kindness in all directions. And I began to realize that he was the Dalai Lama's ninja. He was there to take a bullet for the Dalai Lama. And yet there was no sense of menace from him. There was no aggressiveness, not like, oh, we're going to thump your melon if you mess with the Dalai Lama. He was very sweet, very kind, while his eyes never stopped moving. And he kept scanning the room. And his hands were open at his side, prepared for immediate action if need be. And he inspired me immensely. I mean, honestly, I feel emotional just kind of thinking about him and talking about him. And certainly by extension, as a shout out to people who also in a variety of ways are peaceful warriors, hopefully peaceful, who, include that warrior-like capability in all kinds of ways, including people protesting in the streets for the sake of all of us. And I try to, kind of channel him in some ways. That's that movement from states to traits, so that increasingly that sense of fearlessness and lovingness together with capability, are established in myself in growing ways.
Love it. We're writing a book called The Open-Hearted Warrior, and that's what you're talking about right there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, beautiful title.
Thank you. One more story here real briefly, and this is one that really touched my heart, about the Buddha as a parent and his son Rahula, who told a lie.
Oh, it's funny. So the book itself, Neurodharma, is not a religious book. You can relate to it in an entirely secular way. And certainly, as the Buddha himself taught, see for yourself. See for yourself what rings true and holds value for you over time. So in that context then, there is, I think, some wisdom there. So in this apparently true story, the Buddha, as we know, left his family, wandered through India 7 years or so, became enlightened, we think, and then reconciled with his family. And his son came to join him as a young monk, probably around age 8 or 9. And Rahula, the Buddha found out, told a lie. And so the Buddha talked with him. And I imagine this as a moment of high drama in which, I don't know, Robert De Niro or Jack Nicholson plays the Buddha. Like, oh my God, my dad, the Buddha, is calling me out for something. Ruh-roh. And it's going to be memorialized now for the next 2,500 years, my misbehavior as an 8-year-old kid. And what the Buddha basically said to Rahula was this: Rahula, let your mind be like a mirror in which you just observe what's true. You see what's in the mirror. Yeah. And in particular, before doing something, ask yourself, is this going to be beneficial for other people and myself? Okay, if it is, do it. If it's not going to be beneficial, don't do it. And second, while you are speaking or thinking or acting in other ways, keep asking yourself, is this good? Is this beneficial? Is this conducive to the happiness and the welfare of others and yourself? And if it is, keep doing it. And if you're getting if you're starting to get a nagging sense that this is going terribly wrong, stop doing it. Okay. And then after you have done something, any act of thought, word, or deed, reflect in the mirror and ask yourself, was this in fact conducive to the welfare and happiness of others? And if it was, do it again. And if it wasn't, don't do it again. And what's interesting about that is, first of all, the complete thoroughness of the Buddha. We have the combination of thought, word, and deed, before, during, and after. He's a really thorough guy. 9 ways, in effect, to learn how to be a better person. Second, there's no shaming in it. It's very pragmatic. There's not a moralistic relationship between what he's teaching and some commandments from on high that are sins to violate. He's really, and he's emphasizing as well in this pragmatic frame, the judgment and learning, the existential, independent view of the individual themselves. In this case, an 8-year-old boy, that it's up to us to make this judgment. See for yourself what your actions are. Yeah, be open to others. There's a value in the Buddhist tradition, especially for the monastics, that they be admonishable. In other words, that they be open to correction and input from others, including, the hierarchy of the monastic world. But fundamentally, it's up to us. If I could, and this is in the book as well, it's in one of the last chapters, the Buddha's last words. The Buddha's last words are well translated by Stephen Batchelor as, things fall apart, tread the path with care. Care as conscientiousness and care as heartfeltness that you can bring to your own path.
Thank you. You talked about compassion and kindness.
Yeah.
Kind of a fierce heart. But here, going to the Buddha and his son, I think on some level, without using those words, he's also talking about self-compassion. There is no judgment here, taking care of oneself.
Beautiful, Michael. Yeah. Well, self-compassion is really interesting. It's one of the hardest and most valuable things to develop in a person. It's hard because we tend to give compassion to others, but not ourselves. Compassion simply being empathy for suffering, with benevolence, a kind of caringness and supportiveness that can sometimes move into action. The two together, empathy and benevolence. So we have the bitter and the sweet. We have the bitter of the suffering and the sweet of the caring, the lovingness, the supportiveness, the recognition of burdens, even injustices that others suffer. Self-compassion simply applies it to ourselves. And even though it can be difficult, self-compassion, in simple ways, usually for a handful of seconds. It's not where we end. It's where we start, but it's not where we end. Much research shows that self-compassion promotes resilience. It makes us tougher and stronger. It also makes people more ambitious because they're more willing to swing for the fences and dream big dreams because they're not so vulnerable to destructive self-criticism. self-compassion buttresses us against destructive self-criticism. And so I think, boy, if I were to, think about a number of people I see, and if they were to say, okay, what's one thing that if I developed it would actually, have a big, powerful impact, I would say, self-compassion, the capacity to be warm and supportive toward yourself rather than cold and critically destructive.
Thank you. Then flipping it back to where we just came from, how important is it at this time where you watch things and you watch people who have done things that it's hard to say have not been exceptionally harmful for people? How important is it to bring it back to compassion, to loving kindness, even or especially for them?
I know for myself at a personal level, if somebody has pissed me off, if I have felt wounded or hurt by somebody, there's some kind of wrangle, right? In the real. I never get free of it until three things happen.
Yeah.
First, I need to understand what's happened in some basic way, and kind of tease apart the threads of the knot of what occurred. I need to kind of have a sense of what happened here, including a sense of what values are relevant. Was it a little deal or a big deal? And we all have the right to see what we see. So I until I have some kind of clarity about what's going on, I can't get free. Second, until I take maximum reasonable personal responsibility, I can't get free. Now that maximum reasonable amount might be zero in some cases. In other cases, it can be a lot. It doesn't mean letting other people off the hook or becoming a doormat or a marshmallow for other people to push around, but it means I've got to see my own part. I have to see my own part, even innocently, in the causes and conditions that led to whatever's occurring to occur, my responsibility. And last, I never get free until I find some kind of compassion. Compassion for myself and compassion for the person who wronged me. Otherwise, I'm still stuck to it. And what's interesting is when we find compassion for those who have wronged us, it does not mean, of course, that we approve of them. Compassion is entirely separate from approval or liking or friendliness. We can have compassion for a terrible tyrant who we think deserves to spend the rest of his life in jail, say. We can have compassion for that person who has lost a son, if not two sons. I'm thinking of Saddam Hussein in the second Iraq war recently. And so we can have compassion for that person while still disagreeing vehemently with them. And interestingly, when you find compassion for the person who has wronged you, you feel less upset. It's kind of amazing. So absolutely, I think those three, recognition, responsibility, and compassion, are what liberate us from the tangled web of suffering.
Woohoo! Where can people go, Rick, to find your beautiful books and to find out more?
Oh, thank you. Well, one thing I really recommend, if people are touched by what we've talked about, check out my online Neurodharma program. I taught a 10-day meditation retreat of this material. Then we turned it into an extremely well-organized, high-quality program. It's very affordable. We also have scholarships for people with genuine financial need. And you can just simply go to my website, rickhanson.net. There you can see all kinds of freely offered resources. You can check out the book Neurodharma, and you can also check out the online Neurodharma program.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with people?
Well, interesting there. What's really in the foreground is appreciating you. And I'd like to say that directly to you, Michael, appreciating you. And by extension, I think this time is so important to appreciate others, genuinely. Whoever you happen to appreciate, who could be close at hand or could be spread out around the world. One teaching that is in the foreground of my mind these days comes from Mr. Rogers, who was talking about his mother telling him as a boy that when he was upset about things, look for the helpers. And in this world today, there are many, many people who are helping in all kinds of ways, helping the world to become a better place. And so I think appreciation, including appreciating those who are helping and those who are trying, those who have a practice, those who are sincere, those who are acting in good faith. Appreciating, frankly, people who are a stand for the two principles that are the basis of any healthy relationship, including the politics of a country: tell the truth and play fair. Inside that frame, on those two principles, we can have our differences, liberal, conservative, left and right, whatever, but tell the truth and play fair. And we need to stand up against, in my view, those who violate those two core principles of truth-telling and fair play, because they're destroying the basis for any kind of healthy society.
Couldn't agree more. I appreciate you as well. A big, how do we put this, social distancing man hug. How's that?
There we are. That's cool. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
This has been phenomenal. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get Neurodharma, and begin finding inner peace and greater happiness today, and shine bright. Woohoo! Awesome, Rick. Awesome, awesome, awesome.
You're the man. You are the man. All right, take it easy, Michael. It's great.
If you're watching this, then you are a light worker. You're a light warrior, and I want to help. We offer everything from boot camps, mini masterclasses, full-on masterminds, and private one-on-one coaching with me. To find out more about our upcoming courses, simply visit inspirenationuniversity.com or click on the links below. And to find out more about coaching, simply visit inspirenationshow.com/coaching. We also have weekly YouTube live events with me where you can ask me your questions live, and YouTube premieres featuring me and our guests. Simply subscribe below and click on the bell icon to be notified of upcoming shows. I just had the most beautiful, heartwarming, heartfelt, getting centered, inner peace, oh my God, so beautiful interview with Dr. Rick Hanson. To check out more incredible interviews to help you be the calm at the eye of the storm during this time, click here, subscribe below. Be sure to click on the bell icon to be notified of upcoming shows, YouTube premieres, and live events with me. Be sure to check out our boot camps, our mini masterclasses, and coaching with me. And above and beyond all else, shine bright. Woohoo! Love you guys.